The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Boardwalk Digital Ledger Enterprise Planning webinar series. And today's webinar topic is automating Excel for enterprise planning. There's going to be a lot of information that we're covering this afternoon, but my name is JB Coopy, and I'm here at Boardwalk Tech, and welcome to everyone who's joined today. During the half hour, it's a little bit difficult to answer questions that are sent in, but please feel free, if you have a question during any time during the process, to put in the question into the Q&A panel. We'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar itself, or if there's enough time, we'll go ahead and answer it specifically while we're doing the presentation. We always like to start with this discussion because we find almost without exception, as you look across your business and the work that you do both internally and across your extended value chain, there's still a lot of processes that are being run manually inside of Excel, or data is inside of Excel files and it's very difficult to get access to this information. And in general, what we see is that this really becomes an operating problem that presents great risk in terms of business costs and also operating risk to the business itself. And yet we really don't see this going away. I mean, if you look at that results of the survey from Deloitte down on the bottom, we're still, 70% of companies rely heavily on critical spreadsheets, for portions of their business. And for us, I mean, this is something we've been focused on since 2005. We are not a new company. We've been in the market for quite some time. We developed what was now called a digital ledger in 2005 and received a patent on this technology in 2008. And we have a number of very large companies that you can see some of the names down below, focused across all different areas of the market. So financial services, consulting companies, CPG, and we're also a public company on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So you can find out information about us and the work that we're doing with our different clients. But what we bring to the market is what we call a digital ledger. And this is something new. For those of you that have kind of kept an eye on technology in the marketplace today, almost without exception, the companies or your company and everybody has transactional and legacy data systems like Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, but there's also a lot of information that is locked up inside of spreadsheets today. And this is really kind of the main or initial innovation about the technology is the fact that, unlike other systems that are managing data at a file level or at a record object level, the digital ledger and the digital ledger in general is managing information at what we call cell level. And this will become a little bit more clear as we talk about how this data works and how specifically the Boardwalk Digital Ledger works with data. The second part is that everything is an append-only data store running on a standard relational database, and it does not update or delete a previous value. Now, we think this is important, or we know this is important, because whenever you're doing a planning application, it's all about what's the current value and what's the new value, and how did it change? And that's not always that easy in other systems. There has to be quite a bit of work that goes into a traditional legacy system to put in a logging against the different application areas. And even in that case, it's not necessarily built in that you'll be able to see the old value and the new value. This is part of a digital ledger that all the information is maintained with a complete audit trail. You also, some of you have heard about blockchain likely. Blockchain is a method using cryptography in order to support some immutability around the data that's been exchanged. But if you put all these pieces together, it's really designed for these multi-party enterprise planning applications where it's important to have collaboration and visibility and alignment as the data changes over time. And then as people make changes, to be able to leverage things like machine learning in order to understand what has been changed and how is it going to impact what I may anticipate happening in the future. We call this predicting rather than reacting. And having all of this information trusted, verified, reconcilable, and comparable as part of a ledger environment. So if you take this type of capability, the Boardwalk Tech solution, and look at it as a way to enhance your ERP and Microsoft Excel-based solutions, then where are the areas that you would look at using something like this? Well, a lot of it is around supply chain and interactions between multiple companies, So things like demand planning and forecasting, inventory management, supplier collaboration. But in general with companies, think about budgeting and forecasting across the entire business. And in fact, at the end of this half hour, we'll do a quick demo just so you can see how the ledger works, and that's targeted around a budgeting and forecasting application. But really, it's anywhere where you're doing work manually inside of Excel today, and you're trying to figure out, how do I get better alignment? How do I get better trust in the data? And then how do I learn from the exchanges as opposed to always just kind of reacting and trying to understand what other people have done manually. One of the other areas that we really focus on is this notion of integration and pulling data in. Because invariably, if you think about the things that you do either across departments or across companies, there's a lot of interactions for the data where information needs to come in from different parts of the business. It needs to get aligned with information that's coming in from the partners that you're working with. And then there needs to be a collaborative exchange between all these groups to say, how is this data changing over time? Well, we received a cool vendor award from Gartner for the ability of the ledger to pull in this data from multiple systems and line it up in one environment so everybody is able to interact with the data at the same time. And we also are able to take each one of these and understand the provenance or the change history of the data, such that when you're looking at this and you say, oh, I need to change this value to 925, you'll be able to see what the old value is. You don't have to, like if you log into a current web form and you just look at something, it just shows you what the current value is. And if somebody changes something, it's updated. It's not version and appended. Whereas in a digital ledger, it keeps the old value and the new value so that you can see, for example, if the date changes to November, that this is going to cause a risk associated with, is this particular purchase order, in this particular use case, at risk in terms of collecting the data. And then also, you cannot have a blockchain application if you do not have this type of data management, because a blockchain is all about capturing the consensus state of information at a period of time between multiple parties, which means parts of the data that you're collaborating over would be committed to a blockchain ledger. And if you don't have this capability to work with data over time, you're not going to have a very effective blockchain application. So how does the digital ledger work? You'll see this during the demo, but in general, the idea is that if you think about the way people work with data today, they tend to work in isolation, which means somebody makes a change, they send it to you, and then you like to be able to work with that and go in and, for example, inside of Excel, change some numbers and say, oh, well, maybe this forecast should be 2,000 or 200,000. This one should be 140,000. This one should be 160,000. And you're kind of looking at all this data, making a decision about what exactly do I want to share. And then you say, submit this to the ledger. And what that does is it puts all of those individual changes together and then commits them to the ledger with the insert, as I talked about before. But it's a grouping. And that's important because as you make these changes, you want to know, hey, what did this manager change during this time? And what's the relationship between all the changes? And there is a relationship between the changes because they've made a commitment at a time to say, oh, here's my updates for all of these forecasts. And then you can start to look at everything as a group so you understand what somebody's changed. And if you're inside of Excel, and you'll see this, the change comment feature is used in order to say what was the old value and the new value. But the ledger gets appended. You can use Excel. You can use a browser. You can use a mobile device. Access control is used such that individuals only see their data. So you see here the manager's kind of seeing everything, but in this view, it's only rep one is seeing their data. So as you interact with different parts of the business, you can say, hey, I only want this person to be able to see this data, so don't show them anything else. And then since everything's in a ledger and running in a database, you're able to look across the entirety of this information and say, well, how many people are actually using all these different spreadsheets, or how many different unique users, and when was the last time that something was changed in any one of these spreadsheets? And you can drill down from layer to layer to go in and actually look at the changes in the data, even down to the point where you can say, well, what was the old value and the new value for anything that had been changed in the context of the collaboration? And then in terms of implementing Boardwalk, with other systems, it takes a lot of time in order to stand up an application, especially an application that might be run inside of Excel today, because that information needs to be pulled into a data environment, and you have to create all of the information associated with the object and the storage mapping. So this is going into the database, saying, here are the different fields that I want, here's the different record objects, here's the formulas associated with how I want all this information to be connected. And if you think about the work that you do inside of for example, an Excel workbook, you can have multiple tabs of data, and you need to have that data related to each other. Well, it's pretty complicated in a traditional database environment because you have to set up all these records and objects as different groups, and then how do you have this revenue information tie over to this cost? It's complicated to do all that, and then you have to do the access control where you're saying these different people can see different things and they can't see other things. And then you have to do the workflow, which says, you know, if somebody changes something, how should this data change? And all of this needs to be done before you can even get to the point where you're having collaboration and alignment. Whereas with Boardwalk, all of the digital relationships are taken directly from the existing ledger storage itself. So if you think of an Excel workbook, anything that's inside the Excel workbook that's being run today, that already is a grid of data or a ledger of data, and including all of the formulas without having to recode them into a different type of calculation environment, they can be used directly inside of the Boardwalk Digital Ledger. So let's pause for a minute from the presentation and go in and actually show you something so you can see, because I think seeing is kind of believing. And this is an example of a budgeting application, and it's called by the customer that we did this work on non-contract costs, because what they have is they have a plan that's been put together that says, here are my different business units that I'm working with. Here are my different departments. You can see the different departments. And then the types of cost. So this is saying what type of account is it? Is it a cost one or a revenue one? And then here's all the information that you want to collect as part of the measurements. So in this case, it's saying, what's the current year plan? What's the actuals? And then as you can see here, there's calculations, right? And you as business users are really good at putting these calculations in, but other systems have to either not use this entirely, or they have to recode this in order to make it something that can make sense to their data environment. Whereas Excel understands this very well. I mean, even something here that says, hey, if this is blank, use this value. If it's not, use something else. I mean, why not leverage all this power as part of your application? So in this case, this is a roll-up of the budget data. And then you'll see there's some adjustments over here. And the adjustments are actually pointing to another tab in the workbook where the various users can go in and say, you know, hey, I know I have this as my plan, but here are the adjustments I need to make. And in this case, it's looking at different categories and saying, you know, who the departments are and what category am I going to do adjustment on. And this data is all controlled centrally. So this can come from your Oracle, your SAP, or anything else. And then very importantly, we have this notion of access control. And the access control is such that only the people that have changed something are able to see specific areas. So if I come over and I say, well, who's interacting with this? Well, I want to have these different users, and this can be authenticated against your single sign-on or anything else. But I want to be able to have the business unit 1 only managed by Planner 1. They don't see anything else except their data. And then, hey, maybe I want to have the finance user go in and say, oh, well, only show that person the approved forecast. Don't show them any other data. So this access control capability does the dicing and slicing. And then all of the changes are done through submit refresh. So if I come in here and I click on refresh, then it's going to connect to the ledger. And when it connects to the ledger, it says, well, who is this person? And then I say, well, this is manager 1. And when manager 1 wants to refresh their data, then it goes to the ledger itself, assuming my internet is still working here. It seems like it's a little bit slow. Check my internet. And I say, hey, go find the latest changes from the database. Then it's going to look for the latest changes, in this case, to the actuals, and say, hey, show me what's changed in the background. And if I hover over this, I could say the old value was changed from 1336800 to 13639,800. And all the calculations update automatically. But this is an integration that's going out to the transactional system and saying, hey, find the latest data, bring that in so I can see it inside of my workbook. So this is how we do the cell level changing. And then the other question is, how does somebody start working? Well, in order to start working with this, they end up, instead of emailing a whole bunch of Excel files around, you start with a blank Excel file, not a blank Excel file, but a master template. So if I open this one up and I say, hey, I want to be able to see, my data, then instead of having hundreds of files stored across all these different SharePoint sites, you simply come in and say, oh, well, I want to be able to interact with the ledger. And then you say, well, who am I? And I say, well, I'm Planner 1. And Planner 1 should only get their data. So now what it's doing is it's looking across the cloud to the ledger and it's saying, hey, go find the most recent data and bring that into my local workbook, and then let me work on it offline or in isolation with only the data I'm supposed to have. And in this case, it's only going to have the Planner 1 data. So once it fetches that, it brings the data in, it pushes it down to my desktop, and then when I take a look at the final version of this, or the version I'm looking at on my desktop, I'm only going to see the data from Business Unit 1. So you remember the manager saw the data from everything, whereas I'm only seeing the data from Business Unit 1. If I scroll back up here, I'll see, oh, well, here's just my data. So then I can go ahead and I can make some changes. I can say updates for this week, and I'm going to change this to be 4,000. And you know what? I'm going to put a formula in here. I'm going to say, you know what? I want to make this be 4,000 times 1.2 because I want that to be 20% higher. And then actually here, I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this row. So I'm going to say, copy this row below this current selection. And then I'm just going to say this is still a cost, but it's actually not consulting services. It's computer supplies. And I'll just get rid of these guys, and I'll make this be, 2,000. But, when I'm doing this, right, you're looking at all this data, and you're saying, is this correct? So, these are the types of things. Obviously, I'd spend more time here fixing my margins out in November. But how do you make it easy for somebody to be able to work with this information and share adjustments with everybody else? Well, once I've done these changes, then I can say these are my updates. And then it looks for the changes that have been done by me as this user and pushes them out to the ledger. And now if I go back and I say, okay, well, what did that manager see when that change was done? So I'm going to switch my role back over to the manager and say, let's see what this person did. Now when I go ahead and I refresh back to this page, and you can have email notifications, you can have all sorts of things that are saying what happened and, who changed what and things like that. But fundamentally, the changes are being pushed out at a cell level. So you can see here, this was the change that was done here. Here's the new row that was added. And then as I scroll over here, I look at this one and see here's this formula that was added. And you can control, what people are able to do, what they're not able to do. And then if I click on this and I say, hey, show me the activity for this over the past week, I can see, oh, well, yeah, this was changed this morning at 9:36, but then it was changed at 11:17. So you're able to take what is otherwise an existing set of Excel data that you're sending around manually and sharing with all these people, and instead put it into a digital ledger, make it available for multiple people to interact with the information, and then make it so that everybody's able to see the most current data. You can do the dicing and slicing across different groups, and all this information can be pushed back to your transactional system. So remember when I refreshed here, this showed me what my current actual is. Well, my new approved forecast can now be pushed back to the transactional system saying, hey, here's the consensus adjustments that happened to the forecast. And I didn't actually make a change here, but you can see, this is meant for the management to make an adjustment to say, you know what, I'm not going to adjust, I'm not going to put in all 88,000, I'm only going to approve 3,500. But you spend weeks and weeks chasing after this information with processes that are run manually. And with the digital ledger, you can do it all within a individual system or inside of a digital ledger, which means, from a business perspective, you really get what we call agility for your planning. And this is all about getting better visibility and speeding up your business. Because today, using traditional technology, I mean, you all know the drill, right? You log into a web form, you don't really know what's changed, so then you export the data into a private workspace, and then you do your changes because it's too hard to go in and update, click update, click update, click update, all the different things you have to do. And then you have to go and manually update the data inside the database. And then when you do that, the old decisions are overwritten. So you can't see what the changes very easily. Now, systems obviously have logging capabilities and transaction logging. If they program everything, then all that can work. But, how do you make that apply to everything inside your business? Well, the digital ledger lets you take all this information and have it apply against any different application. And it speeds up the amount of time or lessens the amount of time it takes to share this information between everybody. Because all you do is you say, hey, I'm already working inside of Excel. I understand the environment. I'm going to refresh my changes. I'm then analyzing the changes across all the data to see who made a change and why. Not just the fact that you have the most current data, but to be able to go in like we did in that cell history and say, well, Frank changed this. I wonder why Frank changed this. And, there's a lot of work that has to go into that. So then with the ledger, that's out of the box, and then you can evaluate and make your own changes, make multiple decisions, and then submit it. When you submit it, it's an append only. So it's not overwrite. Everything is available so that you can go back afterwards and say, hey, what did that person change? And how did it actually impact my business? And just to show you another quick thing as I slide over here is, let's say you wanted to actually take a look at the information that's inside a ledger and understand how has it changed over time. Well, you can do things like machine learning to say, how many times has somebody made changes? Now, this is an example of an apparel application for their doing work in process. But they were very concerned about purchase orders being late across their supply chain. So even though they were working inside of Excel to be able to share this information back and forth, and in fact, if I click on this data editor tab over here, it'll log into the browser version of the digital ledger, so you can actually take a look at the data that was being shared between these parties. And if you want to make changes, you can make changes inside of here. But this is showing you when is something being cut, when's it being trimmed, all the different steps that are associated with producing a garment. But the inferencing then looks at this on a basis of time and lets you start to understand, hey, do I have problems? And should I be concerned about, for example, the budget being late because not everybody has approved the phase one budget information? Well, people know how to build these things all day long inside of Excel environments, but to take that into an enterprise platform is very difficult. And then if you're not able to do that, then you're certainly not going to be able to become agile in your business and be able to focus on what we call the operational and shorter term planning, which is the 0 to 12-week time frame, that really can make an impact on what's happening to your business. A digital ledger does not replace your SAP, it does not replace your Oracle, it doesn't replace any of your traditional systems. We see a lot of this work being done, as we said in the beginning of the webinar, and Deloitte talks about this, that a lot of this work is done manually inside of Excel. So a digital ledger is able to take that information that you're working with inside of Excel and directly bring that into an enterprise quality data environment. And just as an example for what this can mean to your company, I mean, if you think about the amount of time that people are wasting working manually with information, where, for example, you have 5, 10, 15, 20 people working inside spreadsheets manually, just having a single version of the truth in order to understand what's changed and not have everybody sitting around saying, hey, did you get that update? Or, gee, I didn't see the update from the field or from this country. Well, that all goes away because now you have a single time-based data environment where all of this information is managed automatically. and available to all the users. Well, if you're able to do that, then you get all the productivity back. And then, as I said earlier, you're able to go from monthly to weekly or daily. And we call this getting, multiple swings at the bat, right? So instead of getting up there once a month and saying, here's my budget, or here's my plan, and then waiting for people to manually put all this information together, you're able to make adjustments 3 or 4 times, which, by definition, assuming everybody's focused on making the process better, means you're going to have a better result. And then the user adoption and change management, I can't tell you how many companies we've talked to that spent millions and millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars on SAP, and yet still people do a tremendous amount of work inside of manual environments like Excel and email, which is fine. We believe that's an important part of what's going on in business, but if you're not able to provide them the best of both worlds, which is the ability to work inside of their transactional system and yet bring that information inside of Excel or inside of a digital ledger, then you're going to end up losing this money here. And then lastly is the reduction in the IT budget. With this type of a platform, you're able to do a lot of different things. I mean, I showed that one slide earlier that said production planning, budgeting, forecasting, pricing. There's many, many things that we find companies are doing manually inside of Excel today, and using the digital ledger to enterprise enable your planning applications is really a tremendous benefit for your IT staff. And many of our customers are, in fact, doing all this work themselves. And we don't even know exactly what they're doing, because if you look at, for example, this apparel manufacturer, there's a lot of different things that they're doing. And they went through and they're systematically saying, well, which ones right now, all of them are being run manually to some extent. And they're saying, well, if I can bring these things into the ledger, then I'm just getting, a larger and larger economy of scale as I move across all these different businesses. So what do we suggest you do? Well, what we suggest you do is that you take advantage of us offering what we call a digital process evaluation. This is where we work with you in order to look at one of the example applications that you're running today. This can be done under NDA, or you can simply send us a spreadsheet that has data that's been kind of generalized. So if you have a spreadsheet that says, here are my customers and here are my products, just change all the customers to customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, and change the products to product A, product B, product C, and then change all your data to 1s and 2s. Because really what's important is that you've defined a business process that is defined by a set of information that's being run manually inside of the ubiquitous digital ledger in the enterprise, which is an Excel spreadsheet, but you can't do anything with it. Whereas with the Boardwalk environment, you're able to take that information directly and scale it. And then you'll have a process proof point. I mean, this is something that you then can use to say, oh, okay, well, I understand how this works in terms of the amount of time that it takes in order to become 100% digital for this type of work. And also the benefits that come into the business in terms of the speed, visibility, alignment, and predictive capabilities of managing data inside of a digital ledger. And what we suggest is that you simply, email demo@boardwalktech.com, or if you want, you can reply back to the email that you received from Claire Cook that talks about the webinar today. And we will be glad to walk you through this process of how you can use the Boardwalk Digital Ledger in order to improve your planning processes in your enterprise today. So with that, that's the end of the webinar today. I do see some questions here that we'll have to get to after the fact, because there's just too many of them to be answered right now in the basically less than a minute that's left, and we always want to make sure that we're ending on time to be cognizant of everybody's time and everybody's busy schedule. But we appreciate your time during the webinar today, and we look forward with engaging you soon and helping you understand how you can automate Excel for enterprise planning. And we hope to see you next month at our next webinar series event, and you'll be able to find that information on our website, which is, of course, www.boardwalktech.com. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.